The gunshot that missed Natalie Reed by 3 inches changed everything. Not because it nearly killed her, but because it brought Vincent Hayes riding hard through the desert dust with eyes that saw past every wall she'd ever built. Keeler, California sat like a handful of sun-bleached bones in the Inyo County desert in 1882. A silver mining town that had seen better days, but still clung to life with the stubborn determination of creosote bushes. Natalie had arrived 2 weeks earlier on a freight wagon, her worldly possessions tied in a canvas bag, her past left behind in the gambling halls and brothels of San Francisco, where she'd worked as a card dealer for men who thought a woman's hands were good for only 2 things. She'd saved every dollar she could hide, dreaming of something different, something clean. The shot had come from a dispute outside the Silver Bell Saloon, 2 miners arguing over a claim that probably wasn't worth the powder to blow it up. Natalie had been crossing the street toward the general store when the bullet sang past her ear and buried itself in the wooden post behind her. She'd frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands shaking as the reality of how close death had come settled over her like a cold blanket. Then he was there, dismounting from a buckskin horse in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the dusty street with authority. Vincent Hayes stood just over 6 feet, all lean muscle and sun-darkened skin, wearing worn denim and a dark shirt with pearl buttons that had seen better days. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing light brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He moved toward the 2 miners with the kind of quiet confidence that made men think twice about their choices. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying across the street without him having to shout. "You nearly killed this woman." One of the miners, a thick-necked man with a beard that hadn't seen scissors in months, spat into the dust. "Wasn't aiming at her. Besides, what's it to you?" Vincent's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, and suddenly the air felt different, charged with possibility. "Makes it my business when innocent people are in danger. You boys take your argument somewhere else, somewhere nobody can get hurt." The other miner, younger and less drunk, grabbed his companion's arm. "Come on, Wade. Let's go sleep it off." After they'd stumbled away, Vincent turned to Natalie, and she felt the full weight of his attention for the first time. His eyes moved over her face with concern, then down to her hands, which were still trembling. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost gentle. Natalie shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. She was 22 years old and thought she'd seen everything life could throw at a person. But something about this man's direct gaze made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the low-cut dresses she'd worn in San Francisco. "You're new in town," he said, stating fact rather than asking a question. "Saw you at the boarding house last week." She found her voice finally, though it came out rougher than she intended. "I am. Thank you for handling that." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned and courteous that it made something in her chest tighten. "Vincent Hayes. I run a small ranch about 5 miles east of here. Not much, just cattle and horses, but it's mine. Natalie Reed." She didn't offer her hand because women of good standing didn't shake hands with men they'd just met, and she was trying very hard to become a woman of good standing, even if it was a lie. "You settling in Keeler, Miss Reed?" The formality of the address made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Miss Reed. As if she were someone respectable, someone worth that kind of consideration. "I'm looking for work." "What kind of work?" There was no judgment in his question, just curiosity. This was the dangerous part, the part where she had to decide how much truth to tell. In San Francisco, she'd learned that truth was a luxury people like her couldn't afford, but something about Vincent Hayes made her want to try anyway. "Honest work," she said carefully. I can keep books, read and write better than most. I worked in. She hesitated, then pushed forward. I worked in a gambling hall, dealing cards and managing accounts, but I want something different now. She waited for his expression to change, for the respect in his eyes to curdle into something else, something she'd seen too many times before. But Vincent just nodded slowly, as if she'd told him she'd worked in a bakery or a dress shop. "Henderson's store needs help," he said. Old Tom Henderson's eyes aren't what they used to be, and his daughter moved to Sacramento last year. He's been trying to manage alone, but the books are in a state. Mentioned it to me just yesterday. Natalie felt hope flicker in her chest, dangerous and bright. "You think he'd consider me?" "I think if I mention you can help sort out his accounting, he'd be grateful." Vincent paused, then added, "If you don't mind me asking, what brought you to Keeler? Not many people come here by choice these days." The truth sat on her tongue, heavy and complicated. She could tell him about the man in San Francisco who decided she owed him more than just dealing cards, about the bruises she'd hidden under powder, about stealing away in the night with nothing but her savings and a desperate need to disappear. But that was too much truth for a first meeting, too much weight to lay on a stranger who'd done nothing but show her kindness. "Needed a fresh start," she said simply. "Somewhere I could be someone different." Vincent studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through her careful words to the messy reality beneath. But all he said was, "Everyone deserves that chance. Come on, I'll walk you to Henderson's store, introduce you proper." As they walked down the dusty main street of Keeler, Natalie became aware of the looks they were drawing. A few women in respectable dresses turned to whisper to each other, and a group of men standing outside the assayer's office watched with undisguised interest. Small towns were breeding grounds for gossip, and she was already marked as an outsider, a woman alone without family or visible means of support. Being seen with Vincent Hayes probably wasn't helping her reputation, but she found she didn't care as much as she should have. "How long have you been in Keeler?" she asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "5 years now. Came out here after the war between the states ended, though I was too young to fight in it. My father did, though, didn't come back." He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity, but she heard the old pain underneath. "My mother passed a year later. After that, there wasn't much keeping me in Missouri, so I headed west. Worked as a ranch hand in Nevada for a while, saved every penny, then bought my place here when the silver boom was just starting." "You work the ranch alone?" "Mostly. I've got 2 men who help during calving season and roundup, but otherwise it's just me. I like it that way. Quiet. Honest work, like you said." Henderson's general store sat on the corner of Main Street and what passed for a side street in Keeler, a sturdy wooden building with a false front that made it look more impressive than it was. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee, tobacco, and dry goods enveloped them. Tom Henderson stood behind the counter, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose, squinting at a ledger with obvious frustration. "Tom," Vincent called out, and the old man looked up with visible relief. "Vincent, good to see you. Come for those supplies already?" "Not yet. Came to introduce you to someone who might solve your bookkeeping problem." He gestured to Natalie. "This is Miss Natalie Reed. She's new in town, has experience with accounts and numbers. I thought you two should meet." Tom Henderson's eyes lit up with interest, and for the next 20 minutes, Natalie found herself answering questions about her experience, carefully editing her history to remove the parts that would make a respectable shopkeeper hesitate. She'd learned in San Francisco that men who ran gambling halls kept complicated books to hide money from various authorities, and managing those accounts had taught her more about arithmetic and bookkeeping than most men learned in business schools. She showed Tom her neat handwriting, demonstrated her quick calculations, and watched his skepticism transform into cautious hope. "I can't pay much," he admitted. "$1 a day, 6 days a week." It was less than she'd made in San Francisco, but it was honest money, and she wouldn't have to dodge grabbing hands or listen to drunk men's propositions. "That would be fine, Mr. Henderson. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow morning? Say 8 o'clock. They shook hands, and Natalie felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety that had been pulled tight since she'd left California's coast. As they left the store, she turned to Vincent, hardly able to believe what had just happened. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You didn't have to do that." Vincent shrugged, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Told you everyone deserves a chance. Besides, Tom needed help and you needed work. Just made sense." They stood on the wooden sidewalk, the afternoon sun beating down on Keeler's dusty streets, and Natalie found herself not wanting to say goodbye. There was something about Vincent Hayes that made her feel safer than she'd felt in years, something solid and reliable that called to the part of her that was so tired of running. "Can I buy you dinner?" The words came out before she could stop them, and she immediately wanted to take them back. Respectable women didn't invite men to dinner, and she was trying so hard to be respectable, but Vincent didn't look shocked or offended. He just smiled, a slow, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'd like that, but let me buy. You just got work, but you haven't been paid yet. There's a boarding house on the east end of town, Mrs. Crawford's place. She serves decent meals, and it's respectable enough that nobody will talk." The fact that he'd thought about her reputation, that he cared about protecting it, made something warm bloom in Natalie's chest. 6 o'clock. "I'll be there." Mrs. Crawford's boarding house was where Natalie had been staying since arriving in Keeler, a 2-story building with peeling white paint and lace curtains in every window. The proprietor was a widow in her 50s who ran a tight ship, renting rooms only to women of good character, and serving meals to boarders and a select few townspeople. The dining room was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and mismatched chairs that had seen better days. When Natalie came down at 6 o'clock, having changed into her best dress, a simple gray cotton with a white collar that was the most respectable thing she owned, Vincent was already waiting. He'd cleaned up too, his face freshly shaved, his hair still damp from washing. He stood when she entered, another one of those old-fashioned courtesies that made her throat tight. "You look lovely," he said simply, and she believed him because his eyes said the same thing. They sat at a corner table, and Mrs. Crawford served them beef stew with fresh bread and butter, followed by apple pie that actually tasted like apples instead of the sad, dried-out offerings Natalie had endured at other establishments. As they ate, they talked, really talked, in a way Natalie hadn't talked to anyone in longer than she could remember. Vincent told her about his ranch, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, about watching calves take their first wobbly steps and training horses to trust a human's touch. He talked about the harsh winters and the brutal summers, about fixing fences and praying for rain and all the small, honest struggles of a man trying to make a life from stubborn land. "It's not easy," he admitted, "but it's mine. Nobody can take it away from me as long as I keep up with the bank payments and the property taxes. That means something, owning a piece of the world." "I never owned anything," Natalie said quietly. "Never had anything that was truly mine." "You own yourself," Vincent said, his eyes serious. "That's more than a lot of people can say." She wanted to argue that you couldn't own yourself when you'd sold pieces of yourself away bit by bit, when you'd let men treat you like property, because you needed to survive." But she didn't say any of that, because this was a nice evening and she didn't want to ruin it with the weight of her past. Instead, she asked, "What made you speak up today? When that bullet came so close?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My mother," he said finally. "She was caught in the crossfire of a bar fight when I was 16. Just wrong place, wrong time like you today. She died 3 days later from infection. I was old enough to know I should have been there, should have protected her somehow, even though there was no way I could have known. When I saw you standing there, saw how close that bullet came, I couldn't let it pass without doing something. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago, but it taught me that we're all just one moment away from everything changing. Makes you want to do right when you can, help when there's helping to be done." They talked until Mrs. Crawford started giving them pointed looks, and the other diners had long since departed. When they finally stepped out into the cool evening air, the desert sky was packed with stars, more stars than Natalie had ever seen in San Francisco, where smoke and fog obscured the heavens. "I should walk you back to your room," Vincent said. "It's not far, but still." They climbed the external stairs to the second floor of the boarding house in silence, and when they reached her door, Natalie turned to face him. In the dim light from the hallway lamp, his face was all planes and shadows, but his eyes were warm. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything today. You keep thanking me, but I didn't do much, just introduced 2 people who could help each other. You did more than you know." She hesitated, then the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. "I should tell you something. I'm not the kind of woman you probably think I am. My past, it's not pretty. I worked in a gambling hall, yes, but it was the kind of place where women were expected to do more than just deal cards, if you understand my meaning. I never. But I was there and people assumed, and I let them assume because it kept me safe sometimes. I just thought you should know that before you decide if you want to be seen with me again." Vincent didn't look away, didn't let his expression change to disgust or disappointment. He just nodded slowly. "Thank you for trusting me with that. But Natalie, I don't care about your past. I care about who you are right now, standing here in front of me. And the woman I see is someone brave enough to start over, honest enough to tell me the truth when you didn't have to. That's who you are. You might be the only person in the world who thinks so. Then everyone else is a fool." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. "I'll probably disappoint you," she whispered. "I'm good at that, at being less than people hope." Vincent reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Impossible," he said softly. "You're already everything." The words hit her like a physical blow, so unexpected and so completely genuine that she felt tears spring to her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her, had ever looked at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, like she was something precious and worth protecting. "You don't even know me," she managed. "Then I'll get to know you, if you'll let me." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he smiled that slow smile again before releasing her hand and stepping back. "Good night, Natalie Reed. I'll see you soon." "Good night, Vincent Hayes." She watched him descend the stairs and mount his buckskin horse, watched him ride off into the darkness toward his ranch 5 miles east. Then she went into her small room, sat on the narrow bed, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of hope that she'd thought she'd lost forever. The next morning, Natalie arrived at Henderson's store at 7:45, too nervous to risk being late. Tom Henderson greeted her warmly and immediately showed her to a small back office where ledgers and receipts were stacked in precarious piles. "I'm afraid I've let it get away from me," he admitted sheepishly. "My late wife used to handle all this. After she passed, I just couldn't seem to keep up." Natalie rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The books were indeed a mess, but it was the kind of mess she knew how to fix. She started by organizing receipts by date, then cross-referencing them with the ledger entries. As she worked, she discovered that Tom was actually doing better than he thought. He just couldn't see it through the chaos. By the end of the first day, she had a system in place, and by the end of the first week, she had the books current and organized. Tom was thrilled. "I had no idea the store was doing this well," he said, peering at her neat columns of figures. "You're a miracle worker, Miss Reed." "Just organized, Mr. Henderson. The numbers don't lie, you just have to know how to read them." Word spread quickly in a small town like Keeler. Within days, other merchants were stopping by to meet the woman who'd sorted out Henderson's books. A few offered her side work, managing their accounts in the evenings. She accepted carefully, not wanting to take on more than she could handle, but grateful for the extra income. Vincent came by the store regularly, usually in the mornings when he was in town for supplies. He always made a point of talking to her, asking about her work, telling her about happenings at his ranch. These conversations were the highlight of Natalie's days, brief moments of connection that left her smiling long after he'd gone. 3 weeks after that first dinner, Vincent asked if she'd like to visit his ranch on Sunday, her day off. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just thought you might like to see what I've been talking about. I'll bring you back before dark, proper and respectable." Natalie accepted, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sunday arrived clear and hot, typical for September in the high desert. Vincent picked her up in a small wagon and they rode east out of Keeler into the empty landscape. "It's not much to look at," Vincent said as they approached his property, "but it's home." He was too modest. The ranch sat in a small valley with a creek running through it, a precious source of water in this dry country. The house was small but well built, made of stone and timber, with a covered porch that faced east toward the sunrise. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and beyond that, she could see cattle grazing on the sparse grass. "Vincent, it's beautiful," she said honestly. He helped her down from the wagon, and she could see the pleasure in his face at her genuine appreciation. He showed her around, introducing her to each horse by name, explaining his plans for expanding the herd, pointing out where he wanted to dig a better well and build a bigger barn. As he talked, his face lit up with enthusiasm, and Natalie found herself falling a little bit in love with his dreams. They had a picnic lunch on the porch, simple fare of bread and cheese and cold chicken that Vincent had prepared himself. As they ate, Natalie felt something shift inside her, some wall crumbling that she'd built around her heart for protection. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, setting down her plate. "Anything. When I left San Francisco, I thought I was just running away, trying to escape my past, become someone new. But being here, working at the store, talking to you, I think maybe I was running toward something instead, toward this. Toward feeling like I could have a real life, a good life." Vincent set down his own plate and moved closer to her on the porch bench. "You can have that, Natalie. You deserve that." "Do I?" The question came out raw, honest. "Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about all the things I've done, all the compromises I made to survive. How do you build something good on such a rotten foundation?" "The foundation isn't rotten," Vincent said firmly. "You survived. That took strength and courage and intelligence. Those are good things to build on." She turned to face him fully. "Why do you believe in me so much? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're kind to Tom Henderson even when he asks you the same question 3 times. I know you save half your lunch to give to that stray cat behind the store when you think nobody's watching. I know you look at the stars at night like they're the most amazing thing you've ever seen. That's enough." "You've been paying attention," she said softly. "Of course I have." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle. "Natalie Reed, I'd like permission to court you properly. I know it's fast, and I know you're just getting settled, but I can't help how I feel. You've gotten into my head and my heart, and I don't want you to leave either place." Her breath caught in her throat. "Vincent, I'll disappoint you. I know I will. I don't know how to be the kind of woman a man like you deserves." "Stop telling me what I deserve," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only affection. "I'm a grown man, and I know what I want. I want you. All of you, past and present and future. Will you let me court you?" She thought about saying no, about protecting him from her damaged self. But the truth was, she wanted this, wanted him, wanted the chance to see if she could be the woman he seemed to think she was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll let you court me." Vincent's face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. And then he was kissing her, gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she'd endured from drunk men in San Francisco. This was a kiss that asked rather than took, that gave rather than demanded. When they pulled apart, she was trembling. "Was that all right?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "That was perfect," she said, and kissed him again. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Natalie had experienced or even imagined. Vincent was attentive without being possessive, romantic without being foolish. He brought her wildflowers he'd picked on his morning rides, brought her books he thought she'd enjoy, brought her little things he'd made with his own hands. A wooden box with a carved lid, a leather bookmark, a set of carved buttons. They spent every Sunday together, alternating between his ranch and walks around Keeler. He introduced her to his friends in town, good men who treated her with respect, because Vincent clearly valued her. The women of Keeler were slower to warm to her, their whispers following her through the streets, but Natalie found she could bear it as long as Vincent believed in her. Tom Henderson became something of a father figure, protective and proud of her work. He gave her a raise after 2 months, then another after 4. She was saving money steadily, building the kind of security she'd always dreamed of. But the past has a way of catching up, no matter how fast or how far you run. It was a cold day in late November when Marcus Thornton walked into Henderson's general store. Natalie was behind the counter, helping Tom stock new inventory when the door opened and a man stepped inside. She looked up automatically, and her blood turned to ice. Marcus Thornton was 45 years old, well-dressed, and handsome in the way a snake is handsome, sleek and dangerous. He'd owned the gambling hall where Natalie had worked in San Francisco, and he'd decided 6 months ago that she owed him more than just her labor. When she'd refused his advances, he'd become vindictive, cutting her pay, giving her the worst shifts, making her life miserable in 1,000 small ways. She'd been planning to quit when she'd overheard him telling another man that he owned Natalie, that she'd work for him until he was done with her. That was when she'd known she had to run. Now he was here in Keeler, standing in Henderson's store with a smile on his face that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Natalie," he said smoothly, "I've been looking everywhere for you." Tom Henderson looked between them, sensing the tension. "Can I help you, mister?" "Marcus Thornton," he said, extending his hand to Tom but keeping his eyes on Natalie. "I'm an old friend of Miss Reed's from San Francisco. Quite a surprise to find her here in this little town." "Not a friend," Natalie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Henderson, this is my former employer." "Ah, so formal, Natalie." Marcus's smile sharpened. "After all, we meant to each other." "We never meant anything to each other," she said flatly. "I worked for you, then I left, that's all. You left without notice, taking money that wasn't yours." Her heart stopped. That was a lie, a complete lie. She'd taken only her own saved wages, money she'd hidden carefully over months. But she could see where this was going, could see the trap closing around her. "That's not true," she said, "isn't it? $500 went missing the night you disappeared. You were the only one with access to the office safe." He turned to Tom with an expression of concerned regret. "I'm sorry to bring such trouble to your establishment, sir. But I've tracked Miss Reed all this way to recover what was stolen and to see justice done." "That's a lie," Natalie repeated, louder now. "I never stole anything. Then you won't mind if I involve the local sheriff. I have documentation, witnesses back in San Francisco who will testify to your theft." Natalie felt the world tilting under her feet. She knew how this worked. Marcus had money and connections. He could manufacture witnesses, forge documents. In a court of law, her word against his would mean nothing, especially given her reputation as a woman who'd worked in a gambling hall. She could be arrested, tried, sent to prison. Tom Henderson cleared his throat. "Now hold on just a minute, Mr. Thornton. Those are serious accusations. Miss Reed has been nothing but honest in all her dealings with me." "I'm sure she has," Marcus said smoothly. "She's very good at appearing honest. It's one of her talents." The door opened again and Vincent walked in. He took one look at Natalie's white face, at the well-dressed stranger standing too close to her, and his expression hardened. "What's going on here, Vincent?" Natalie said, and hated how her voice shook. Marcus sized up Vincent with a practiced eye, taking in the worn work clothes and the honest dirt under his fingernails. "And you are Vincent Hayes, Miss Reed's intended." The words were deliberate, a claim and a protection in one. Natalie's heart swelled even as terror gripped her. They'd talked about marriage but hadn't formalized anything yet. Vincent was putting himself between her and danger, and she loved him for it even as she feared what it would cost him. "How charming," Marcus said. "Has she told you about her past, Mr. Hayes, about the kind of work she did?" "She's told me everything I need to know." "Has she told you she's a thief?" Vincent took a step closer to Marcus, and though he was no taller than the other man, he suddenly seemed to take up more space, seemed more solid and dangerous. "I'd be real careful about throwing accusations at the woman I'm going to marry. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. She stole $500 from my establishment in San Francisco. I have proof." "What kind of proof?" Vincent's voice was hard. "Documentation. Witness statements. The testimony of reputable businessmen." "The testimony of men who work for you, you mean," Natalie said bitterly. "Men who'll say whatever you pay them to say." Marcus turned to her with mock sadness. "I hoped you'd come back willingly, Natalie. Return what you took and we could forget this whole unfortunate incident. But if you insist on being difficult, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." "Why are you really here?" Natalie asked. "It's not about money. You probably spend $500 on your suits." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, something ugly and possessive. "You embarrassed me. You left without permission, without paying what you owed. Nobody does that to me. I didn't owe you anything. I worked, you paid me, that was our arrangement. You owed me respect. You owed me loyalty." "You owed me," he cut himself off, but the implication hung in the air. Vincent moved fast, grabbing Marcus by the front of his expensive coat and slamming him against the wall. "You finish that sentence and I promise you'll regret it." "Vincent, don't," Natalie said urgently. "He's not worth it." Tom Henderson had disappeared into the back room and now returned with the town sheriff, William Porter, a practical man in his late 50s who'd been keeping the peace in Keeler for a decade. "What's all this commotion?" Sheriff Porter asked, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. Marcus straightened his coat, his composure returning. "Sheriff, thank goodness. I'm Marcus Thornton from San Francisco. I'm here to report a theft committed by Miss Natalie Reed. I have documentation proving she stole $500 from my establishment before fleeing the city." Sheriff Porter looked at Natalie. "That true, Miss Reed?" "No, sir, I never stole anything. I saved my own wages and left when Mr. Thornton's demands became inappropriate." "She's lying," Marcus said smoothly. "I have witnesses, documentation." "Let me see this documentation," the sheriff said. Marcus produced papers from his coat, and Natalie's heart sank as she saw how official they looked. There were statements from 3 men who claimed to have seen her with money that didn't belong to her, an accounting of the missing funds, even a copy of a safe inventory showing $500 missing the night she left. Sheriff Porter read through the papers carefully, then looked at Natalie. "You have anything to say to this? It's all lies. Those men work for him. They'll say whatever he tells them to say. The inventory can be faked. Sheriff, please, I worked in that gambling hall for 3 years. I dealt cards and kept books. I saved every penny I could hide away. When I left, I took only what was mine." "Why'd you leave sudden-like without giving notice?" the sheriff asked. Natalie felt her face flush. "Mr. Thornton wanted. He expected me to provide services beyond the work I was hired for. When I refused, he made my life difficult. I was afraid of what he might do, so I left." Marcus laughed, a cold sound. "A convenient story. The truth is, she stole from me and ran. Now she's invented this tale of harassment to avoid responsibility." "You're the one lying," Vincent said, his voice like gravel. "Anyone can see she's telling the truth." "Can they?" Marcus looked around the store. "Or are they just seeing a woman who's managed to fool a few people in this backwater town? Sheriff, I'm a respected businessman in San Francisco. I employ over 50 people. My reputation is impeccable." "What is her reputation?" "A woman alone, working in gambling halls, claiming to be virtuous." "Please." The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "This is complicated. Miss Reed, I'm going to have to ask you to stay in town while I look into this. Don't leave Keeler." "She should be arrested," Marcus pressed. "Held until this can be properly adjudicated." "I'll decide what should be done," Sheriff Porter said firmly. "Right now, I'm telling Miss Reed to stay put while I investigate. That's all." After the sheriff and Marcus left, Natalie sank onto a stool behind the counter, her legs too weak to hold her. Vincent immediately went to her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "We'll fight this," he said. "Whatever it takes. Vincent, you don't understand. He has money, power, connections. He can make those lies look like truth. I could go to prison." "Not if I can help it." He squeezed her hands. "Natalie, listen to me. You are not alone in this. You have me, you have Tom, you have friends in this town." "What friends? Most of the women here already think the worst of me. This will just confirm what they suspected." Tom Henderson came over, his weathered face troubled but determined. "Miss Reed, I don't believe a word that man said. I've been watching you work for months now, handling my money, my inventory. If you were a thief, you'd have stolen from me. But my accounts have never been more accurate, and I've never had so much as a penny go missing. I'll testify to your character anywhere." "Thank you," Natalie whispered, "but character testimony might not be enough against his documentation." "Then we'll find proof of our own," Vincent said. "There's always truth if you dig deep enough." Over the next few days, Natalie felt like she was living in a nightmare. Marcus stayed in Keeler, taking a room at the hotel and making himself visible around town. He was charming to the townspeople, presenting himself as a wronged businessman forced to chase down a thief. Some people believed him. Others reserved judgment. A few, like Tom and Vincent, stood firmly on Natalie's side. Vincent hired a lawyer from Independence, the larger town 20 miles south, a young man named Samuel Wright, who just passed the bar but was eager and intelligent. Together, they started building Natalie's defense. "Tell me everything," Samuel said during their first meeting. "Every detail about your time in San Francisco, about your relationship with Marcus Thornton, about the night you left." So Natalie told him. She told him about starting work at the gambling hall when she was 19, after her mother died and left her with nothing. She told him about keeping her head down and working hard, about learning the intricacies of bookkeeping from the old man who'd managed the accounts before he died. She told him about Marcus taking over the hall 2 years ago, about his gradual escalation from inappropriate comments to direct propositions to threats. "He said I belonged to him," she said quietly, "that I was his property and should act like it. I told him I'd quit, and he said I'd never work anywhere else, that he'd ruin me. So I started planning to leave. I saved every dollar I could. I hid it in my room, not in the hall's safe, because I knew better than to trust anything Marcus had access to. The night I left, I took my bag and walked out during my break. I never went near that safe, never touched any money but my own." Samuel made detailed notes. "Can you prove the money you took was yours? Pay receipts, anything like that?" Natalie shook her head. "Marcus paid us in cash, no receipts. That was part of how he kept his books looking cleaner than they were. I'm sure that's also how he's able to claim I stole. There's no paper trail to prove either story." "So it's your word against his," Samuel said grimly, "with him having manufactured evidence and you having only your testimony." "It's hopeless, isn't it?" "Nothing's hopeless," Vincent said firmly. He'd been sitting quietly in the corner of the lawyer's office, but now he leaned forward. "There has to be something we can do." Samuel tapped his pencil against his notes. "We need to undermine his credibility. If we can prove he's lying about anything, it casts doubt on everything. Mr. Hayes, you said you've asked around about Thornton since he arrived." "I have. He's staying at the hotel, spending money freely, but something doesn't add up. He supposedly came all this way chasing $500, but he's spending more than that on his room and meals and drinks at the saloon." "Interesting," Samuel said. "What else?" He's been asking questions about Natalie, not just about where she works or lives, but personal questions. What she does, who she talks to, who I am to her. Doesn't sound like a man chasing a debt, sounds like something more personal. "Obsession," Natalie said quietly. "He's obsessed. I saw it before I left. He didn't care that I said no, he just got more determined. This isn't about money. It's about control, about punishing me for leaving." Samuel nodded slowly. "If we can prove that, prove he's fabricated these charges out of vindictiveness rather than legitimate grievance, we might have a case. But we'd need evidence. Witnesses from San Francisco who could testify to his character, to his treatment of you." "That's impossible," Natalie said. "Anyone still working for him wouldn't dare speak against him, and anyone who doesn't work for him wouldn't have witnessed what happened." They sat in discouraged silence for a moment. Then Vincent said, "What about other women? You can't have been the first woman he targeted. If we could find others, get them to testify to a pattern of behavior." "That's a long shot," Samuel warned. "We'd have to find them, convince them to come forward, which is hard when there's shame and fear involved." "But it's possible," Vincent pressed. "It's possible," Samuel agreed. "But we don't have much time. Marcus is pushing for a quick hearing. Without evidence to counter his claims, the sheriff will have no choice but to hold Miss Reed for trial." That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how her fresh start had turned into this nightmare. Around midnight, there was a soft knock at her door. "Natalie," Vincent's voice barely above a whisper. "Are you awake?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "Vincent, you can't be here. If Mrs. Crawford finds out, I don't care," he said. "I needed to see you to make sure you're all right." She stepped back to let him in, propriety be damned. He closed the door softly behind him and immediately pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses and the clean soap he used. "I'm so sorry," she said against his shirt. "I've brought this trouble on you, on everyone who's been kind to me." "You haven't brought anything but good into my life," Vincent said firmly. "Marcus Thornton brought the trouble, not you. Maybe I should just go, leave Keeler, run again. At least then you and Tom wouldn't be caught up in this." Vincent pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands on her shoulders. "Is that what you want, to run?" "No," she admitted. "I'm so tired of running, but I'm more tired of hurting people I care about." "You're not hurting me, you could never hurt me." He cupped her face in his hands. "Natalie, I love you. I've loved you since the day I saw you standing in the street with that bullet hole in the post behind you, brave and scared at the same time. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you look at the world like it might be good despite everything. I love you and I'm not letting you go without a fight." The tears came then, hot and fast, and she couldn't stop them. "I love you too. That's why this is so hard. I love you and you deserve so much better than this mess." "I deserve you," he said simply. "And you deserve a life without fear, without someone like Marcus Thornton trying to control you. We're going to fight this and we're going to win. I promise you." He kissed her then, and she kissed him back desperately, pouring all her fear and love and hope into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, she felt steadier, stronger. "I should go," Vincent said reluctantly, "before someone sees me here and gives the gossips more ammunition." "Stay," she whispered. "Please, I know it's not proper, but I need you tonight. I need to not be alone." Vincent hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and what she needed. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but just to hold you, nothing improper. I won't risk your reputation any more than it already is." They lay down on the narrow bed, Vincent fully clothed, Natalie in her nightgown. He wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed her back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to sleep. The next morning, she woke to find Vincent already gone, a note on her pillow written in his neat hand. "Gone to Independence. Back soon. Trust me, I love you." She held the note to her chest, wondering what he was planning but trusting him completely. Vincent returned 3 days later with a woman named Catherine Morrison. She was in her early 30s, simply dressed, with tired eyes that had seen too much. He brought her straight to Samuel Wright's office, where Natalie was going over her testimony for the upcoming hearing. "Miss Reed, this is Catherine Morrison," Vincent said. "She has something to tell you." Catherine sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Mr. Hayes found me in Independence. I used to work for Marcus Thornton in San Francisco 3 years ago." Natalie's heart started to pound. Did he? "He targeted me, same as you," Catherine said quietly. "I dealt cards, kept my head down, tried to be invisible. But he noticed me anyway, started making comments, then demands. When I refused, he threatened me, said I'd never work again, that he owned me. I was too scared to run, so I gave in. For 6 months I did what he wanted. Then one night he hit me, split my lip open. That's when I found the courage to leave. I took my things and ran to Independence, changed my name, started over." "I'm so sorry," Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion. "When Mr. Hayes came asking questions, describing Marcus and what he'd done to you, I knew I had to speak up. I couldn't let him do to you what he did to me." Catherine looked at Samuel. "I'll testify, I'll tell everything. I know it's just my word against his, but maybe it will help." "It will help," Samuel said with satisfaction. "It establishes a pattern of behavior. It corroborates Miss Reed's account." "Thank you, Miss Morrison. You're very brave." Vincent had found two other women willing to testify. Together, they painted a picture of Marcus Thornton as a man who preyed on women in his employ, who used threats and fabricated charges to control them. One woman, Sarah Peters, had nearly been arrested for theft just like Natalie, but she'd managed to prove her innocence through a friend who'd witnessed her saving her own wages. With this testimony, Samuel felt they had a real chance. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday before Judge Harrison, who rode circuit through Inyo County. The days leading up to it were tense, but Natalie felt hope building, fragile but real. Marcus Thornton wasn't idle during this time. When he learned about the women coming to testify, he tried to discredit them before they could speak. He spread rumors that they were disgruntled former employees, that they were friends of Natalie's who would lie for her, that their testimony was manufactured. But the women stood firm, and the people of Keeler started to see through Marcus's polished exterior to the ugliness beneath. Tom Henderson spoke openly about Natalie's honesty and work ethic. Vincent made it clear he was standing by her, even Mrs. Crawford, the boarding house proprietor, told anyone who'd listened that Miss Reed was a good girl who'd never caused a moment of trouble. The hearing took place in the town hall, the largest building in Keeler. Judge Harrison was a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness. The room was packed with townspeople, everyone curious to see how this would play out. Marcus's lawyer, brought from San Francisco, presented their case first. He laid out the documentation, the witness statements, the accounting of missing funds. It looked damning, and Natalie felt her courage waver as she listened to herself being described as a cunning thief who'd betrayed her employer's trust. Then, it was Samuel Wright's turn. He methodically dismantled each piece of evidence, pointing out inconsistencies in the witness statements, questioning why a man would travel so far and spend so much money to recover a relatively small sum. He called Tom Henderson to testify about Natalie's character and honesty. He called Sheriff Porter to note that Natalie had made no attempt to hide or run after Marcus arrived, which wasn't the behavior of a guilty person. Then he called Catherine Morrison. Catherine's testimony was quiet but devastating. She described working for Marcus, his inappropriate behavior, his threats, his violence. She described how he'd threatened to charge her with theft when she tried to leave, exactly as he was doing to Natalie. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying for money or attention. But Catherine held firm. "I have no reason to lie. I came here because I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy another woman's life the way he tried to destroy mine." Sarah Peters testified next, then the third woman, Emma Cole. The pattern was undeniable. Marcus Thornton preyed on women, controlled them through fear, and used fabricated theft charges when they tried to escape. Finally, Natalie took the stand. Samuel led her through her story carefully, letting her explain in her own words why she'd left San Francisco, what she'd built in Keeler, why she knew she was innocent. "Miss Reed," Samuel said, "did you steal $500 from Marcus Thornton?" "No, sir. I never stole a penny from anyone in my life." Marcus's lawyer cross-examined her aggressively, trying to trip her up, trying to make her look dishonest. But Natalie had truth on her side, and truth is harder to shake than lies. "Isn't it true you worked in a gambling hall?" The lawyer asked, his tone suggesting this was shameful. "Yes." "Isn't it true that such establishments attract unsavory characters?" "Yes." "Then how can you expect us to believe you're a woman of good character?" "Because character isn't determined by where you work," Natalie said clearly. "It's determined by how you conduct yourself. I worked honestly. I saved my money honestly. I left when my employer became threatening, which was the smart and safe thing to do, or the guilty thing to do." "No, sir, the survivor's thing to do." The lawyer had no response to that. Judge Harrison called a brief recess, then returned with his decision. The room fell silent. "I've listened carefully to all testimony," he said, "and I've reviewed the documentation provided by both sides. Mr. Thornton, your evidence, while superficially convincing, lacks the ring of truth. The testimony of 3 separate women describing identical patterns of behavior from you is, however, highly credible. I find that this is not a legitimate theft case, but rather a vindictive attempt to punish Miss Reed for rejecting your advances and leaving your employ." Marcus stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, those women are lying." Sit down, Mr. Thornton," the judge said sharply. "I'm not finished. Miss Reed, I find no credible evidence that you stole anything. You're free to go, all charges dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Thornton, I'm ordering you to leave Keeler and not return. If you attempt to contact Miss Reed or any of the women who testified today, I'll have you arrested for harassment. Do I make myself clear?" Marcus's face twisted with fury, but he had no choice. "Perfectly clear, Your Honor." As the judge dismissed the court, Natalie felt Vincent's arms come around her from behind, felt him lift her off her feet in a bear hug. Around them, people were clapping, and she saw Catherine and Sarah and Emma smiling at her with tears in their eyes. "It's over," Vincent said in her ear. "It's really over. Thank you," she said, turning to face him. "Thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me." "Always," he said simply. Marcus Thornton left Keeler that afternoon, his face dark with rage. Natalie watched from the window of Henderson's store as he rode out of town, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what freedom felt like. That evening, Vincent took her back to his ranch. They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. "Marry me," Vincent said, not as a question but as a statement of intent. Natalie turned to look at him. "Are you sure? After everything you've seen, everything you know about my past?" "I've always been sure. From the first moment, I think. But now, after watching you stand up in that courtroom, after seeing your courage and your strength, I'm even more certain. You're extraordinary, Natalie Reed, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I'm not extraordinary. You're everything," he interrupted. "And I love you, so marry me. Build this life with me. Help me raise cattle and horses and maybe someday children. Grow old with me on this ranch, watching sunsets just like this one." "I'll still disappoint you sometimes," she said, but she was smiling now. "I'll burn dinner and argue with you and be stubborn." "Good," Vincent said. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her as the sun slipped below the horizon, and Natalie thought that maybe, just maybe, she could have the happy ending she'd stopped believing in. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Keeler. Catherine, Sarah, and Emma came for the wedding, sisters in survival who'd become friends. Tom Henderson walked Natalie down the aisle since she had no family of her own, and Mrs. Crawford wept openly in the front pew. Half the town turned out, the community that had judged her now celebrating her happiness. Natalie wore a simple white dress she'd made herself, with lace at the collar that Vincent had bought for her from Independence. As she walked toward Vincent waiting at the altar, his eyes full of love and promise, she felt something shift inside her. All the fear, all the shame, all the belief that she wasn't worthy of good things, it fell away like chains she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten they were there. "I do," she said when the preacher asked if she took Vincent to be her husband, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I do," Vincent said in return, and she heard the same conviction in his voice. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, and Vincent was gentle and patient, treating her like she was precious. When he made love to her for the first time, it was nothing like the rough encounters she'd feared from drunk men in gambling halls. It was tender and passionate and full of the kind of intimacy she'd never believed was possible. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. "My wife, my Natalie." "I love you," she said back. "My husband, my Vincent." Life settled into a rhythm after that. Natalie continued working at Henderson's store 3 days a week, but she spent the other days at the ranch, learning to manage the household, to tend the garden she planted, to help Vincent with the lighter ranch work. She discovered she was good with horses, patient and gentle, and Vincent taught her to ride properly. The ranch prospered. Vincent's hard work and Natalie's careful management of their finances allowed them to expand the herd, to improve the property. They built a bigger barn, dug a better well, added a room onto the house. A year after their wedding, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, afraid she wouldn't know how to be a mother, that she'd fail this child the way she felt she'd failed at so many things. But Vincent was excited and confident, and his certainty became hers. Their first child was born in the spring of 1884, a healthy boy with Vincent's light hair and Natalie's dark eyes. They named him Thomas, after Tom Henderson, who had become like a grandfather to them both. Holding her son for the first time, Natalie wept with joy and wonder that she got to have this, that life had given her something so perfect. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Sarah Peters, who'd been so brave in testifying. Then another son, William, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious for two became crowded and noisy with children, and Natalie loved every chaotic moment. Tom Henderson retired and sold the store to a young couple from Nevada, but he stayed in Keeler, living in a small house near the church. He spent his days visiting the ranch, teaching Thomas and Sarah their letters, telling them stories about their remarkable mother. "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known," he'd tell them. "She started over with nothing and built a whole new life through sheer will and hard work." "Tell us about the trial," Thomas would beg, and Tom would recount the story, making it sound like an epic battle between good and evil, which maybe it was. The women who'd testified stayed in touch. Catherine married a shopkeeper in Independence and had 3 children. Sarah opened a boarding house for working women in Sacramento. Emma started a small school in Los Angeles. They wrote letters, sharing their lives, supporting each other from afar, a sisterhood forged in survival. The years passed, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. There were droughts that tested the ranch, winters that were particularly harsh, the death of Tom Henderson when Thomas was 10 years old. But through it all, Vincent and Natalie remained solid, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, Vincent took Natalie back to the porch where he'd first proposed, the children safely with Mrs. Crawford in town. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" he asked. "When you said you'd disappoint me. You said it was impossible," Natalie replied. "That I was already everything." "I was right," Vincent said. 10 years, 3 children, more joy than I knew was possible, and you've never disappointed me once. Well, except maybe that time you tried to make apple butter and nearly burned down the kitchen." Natalie laughed. "That was only once. And you made me promise never to attempt canning again without supervision." "Smart man, your husband," Vincent said, pulling her close. "Seriously, though, you're more than I ever dreamed of. You've made my house a home, raised our children to be good and kind and brave like you. You've made me happier than I have any right to be." "I used to think I didn't deserve happiness," Natalie said softly, "that my past had ruined me for anything good. But you taught me that the past doesn't define us, that we can choose who we become." "You taught me that too," Vincent said. You chose to be brave. You chose to start over. You chose to trust me, to love me, to build this life with me. Those were all choices, Natalie. Good choices. She kissed him as the sun set, just like that first evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Best choices I ever made. Their children grew. Thomas became a veterinarian, studying in San Francisco before returning to open a practice in Independence. Sarah became a teacher, passionate about education and helping children who came from difficult circumstances. William took over the ranch, working alongside his aging father with the same dedication Vincent had always shown. When Natalie was 45, she wrote a book. It was a simple memoir, telling her story from gambling hall worker to respected rancher's wife, meant to encourage other women that their past didn't have to determine their future. It was published by a small press in Sacramento and didn't sell many copies, but the letters she received from women who'd read it and found hope in her story made it worthwhile. You're still changing lives, Vincent said, reading over one particularly moving letter from a woman in Oregon. Still being brave. I learned from the best, Natalie said, kissing his cheek. They grew old together on the ranch, watching their children have children of their own. Vincent's hair went silver, and Natalie's dark hair showed threads of white. Their bodies moved slower, but their love remained constant, a steady flame that never dimmed. On the evening of their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Vincent raised a glass in a toast. To my wife, he said, his voice still strong despite his 72 years. Who thought she'd disappoint me but instead gave me everything. Here's to 30 more years. I don't think we've got 30 more in us, Natalie said with a laugh, but she raised her glass anyway. Then here's to however many we get, Vincent amended. And to making every single one of them count. They lived 14 more years together. Vincent passed in the spring of 1926, dying peacefully in his sleep at 86 years old. Natalie held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him, that he'd been her salvation, that she'd see him again. She lived another 5 years after that, dying at 87 surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Her last words were about Vincent, how she couldn't wait to see him again, how he'd been right all those years ago when he'd said she was everything. They buried her next to him on the ranch, on a small hill overlooking the valley where they'd built their life together. The headstone reads simply, Natalie Reed Hayes, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she chose courage. Sarah, now a woman in her late 50s, stood at her mother's grave with her brothers and spoke the words Vincent had said so many years ago, words that had become family legend. She said she'd only disappoint him. He said it was impossible, that she was already everything, and he was right. She was everything to all of us. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren nodded, tears streaming down their faces, but also smiling because Natalie and Vincent's love story hadn't ended in sadness. It had ended the way all great love stories should, with a life well lived, a family well loved, and two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. The house was expanded and modernized, but they kept the original porch where Vincent had first kissed Natalie, where he'd proposed, where they'd sat together on countless evenings watching the sunset. Thomas's granddaughter, doing research for a school project in 1975, found her great-grandmother's memoir in the town library, its pages yellow and brittle with age. She read it cover to cover, mesmerized by the story of this woman who'd come from so little and built so much. Why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? She asked her grandfather William, now an old man himself. Because to us it was just life, William said. just the story of how our parents met and fell in love, but you're right, it's more than that. It's a reminder that where you start doesn't matter as much as where you choose to go. The memoir was reprinted by a university press interested in women's history of the Old West. It became required reading in several women's studies courses. Natalie's story inspiring new generations of women to believe in the possibility of change, of redemption, of starting over. In Keeler, which had become nearly a ghost town as the silver ran out and people moved away, the old house where Natalie had boarded was torn down. But someone placed a historical marker, noting that Natalie Reed Hayes had lived there when she first came to town, before she married Vincent Hayes and started the Hayes Ranch that still operated today. The historical marker read, "On this site stood the boarding house where Natalie Reed Hayes began her new life in Keeler in 1882. Her story of courage and transformation has inspired generations. She proved that the past does not have to determine the future, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds." Tourists sometimes stopped at the marker, reading Natalie's story, then drove out to the ranch to see where she'd lived out her days. The Hayes family welcomed them, proud of their matriarch's legacy, happy to share her story. And on quiet evenings, when the desert sky turned those same shades of orange and gold and purple that Natalie and Vincent had watched together so many times, family members would sit on that old porch and imagine they could feel the presence of their ancestors, still in love, still together, still proving that impossible was just a word that didn't apply to them. Because Vincent had been right all along. Natalie hadn't disappointed him. She'd given him everything: love, family, partnership, joy. And he'd given her the same, plus something she'd never had before, the absolute certainty that she was worthy of it all. Their love story, which began with a bullet that missed and a cowboy who saw past a woman's defenses, became the foundation of a family legacy that lasted generations. It proved that redemption was possible, that love could triumph over fear and shame, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was give someone a chance to be more than their past. In the end, Natalie Reed Hayes was exactly what Vincent had always said she was: everything. And that was enough, more than enough. It was perfect.